Chilling new details in the cold-blooded murder of Texas deputy Darren Goforth. Investigators saying the suspect, Shannon Miles, fired 15 rounds, shooting the deputy from behind, then standing over his body and pulling the trigger until the gun was empty. President Obama calling Deputy Goforth's widow, offering his condolences. Meanwhile, the Harris County Sheriff pointing a finger at the fiery anti-police rhetoric in the Black Lives Matter movement. Let's talk about all that now with Leslie Marshall, syndicated radio talk show host and Huffington Post blogger, and David Webb, radio talk show host on SiriusXM, Patriot, a columnist for The Hill, and both are Fox News contributors. David, I want to start with you because now we know the brutality, and perhaps we have a sense of the intent when you fire 15 shots.
The intent is to kill. Bill, the intent is to kill. Yes, they can talk about his history, but as we have seen in the case of even a James Holmes, a claim of mental history does not mean you're not a depraved killer. This 30-year-old man, and he is a grown man, had a history of criminal behavior as well. He walked up to someone because of the uniform he wore, someone who protects the community, including this man if he was in trouble, and shoots him in the back and then empties the gun. Fully, deliberately standing there, and this permissive environment which does exist in America. I talk to cops daily, Bill. I know these guys. They get up, they're out there on the streets. I'll have lunch with a friend of mine later who's on the job and says, look, I have to wonder, am I going home to my family later because of someone who thinks that Black Lives Matter in this environment spurred on by this leftist groups or these leftist-supported groups is really about solving problems.
Well,
They're serious concerns.
The thing we don't know, Leslie, is the motivation of this killer. But we do know the sheriff, we know what he thinks right now. Just listen to what he told Greta as it relates to the Black Lives Movement, then I'll get you to comment on this.
When talk shows and different groups begin to elevate the level of extremism and that kind of dialogue, that there are people who are subject to responding to that kind of language, and sometimes in violent ways.
And that may have been the case here, Leslie.
It may have been. Like you said, we really don't know. There's one thing that's very clear. You know, this is definitely overkill. Whether it looks because there's no connection, like this was the reason, the motivation was that uniform. But for years, even decades, we've had anti-cop and cop killer kinds of rhetoric in rap music long before Ferguson, long before Black Lives Matter. So I'm not sure it was Black Lives Matter or that chant, that disgusting chant that motivated this.
A CD or a record, a digital recording might be one thing, but when you're marching in the streets in Minnesota like we're watching right now, I mean, that's going to a whole new level.
Yes, it is, Bill. It goes to a whole new level, contrary to what Leslie says about gangster rap. Look, I know some of these guys from that era. Yes, they talked about those issues, but that was confined to music and the issue while it was broadcast nationally. Here we have a movement of people marching, shutting down highways in New York, chanting, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want it now? Or in Minneapolis, pigs in a can, fry 'em in bacon. We're talking about people who are coming out en masse, black, white, and otherwise, which is why we need to realize that this is not about solving problems in the black community or problems with bad cops. It is a leftist approach, much like Occupy Wall Street. You follow the money on these groups, you see who's funding them, you see what these people are doing and what they're not doing. They're not seeking solutions. They're not going down to Ferguson saying, let's help West Florissant, South Florissant, let's rebuild communities, let's rebuild in Baltimore, let's rebuild the relationship with the police. What they're doing is they're simply tearing down the structures, and they create this environment where you now have police officers who have a target on their back.
If this is the case, then, Leslie, at some point you reach the point where there is backlash. And maybe when you hear that sheriff in Texas talk about it, maybe you've gotten to that point.
Well, I think that we've seen backlash from both sides. I mean, it's inexcusable for anyone to target police or anyone else for that matter. This language and this rhetoric is inexcusable. But to me, the Black Lives Matter movement that goes to political rallies and that talks to politicians that are running for president, both Democrats and Republicans, this is not the group. I think these are offshoots of that group. To David's point about Occupy Wall Street, we saw the same thing happen there and with other organizations where where they start out peaceful, they want to hit people politically, and then there are offshoots and groups that are offshoots that turn violent or have violent rhetoric, such as
let's hope it doesn't happen again, whether connected or not. Listen, I've got to run. David, thank you. Leslie, thanks to you as well. And this is to be continued. Appreciate
my
your time.
condolences to the families.
Indeed.